Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to yet another edition of the Aftermarket Champions Podcast. This is your host, Vivek Joshi, and I'm excited to bring to you a new guest today, somebody I've known for many, many years. Ryan Cook joins us. He's a Senior Business Unit Manager from Franklin Electric, in charge of the Aftermarket Division for the pumps business. And Ryan joins us today from Charlotte, North Carolina. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Vivek. Thanks for having me on.
Ryan, you and I have known each other for many, many years. I think it goes back to 2016 or 17. I've watched your progress with great excitement in terms of how you've gone from strength to strength in your career. But of course, I know you, the others don't. So maybe give a little bit of introduction to yourself, your origin story, if you may.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. So started my career with Ingersoll Rand right out of college. And I guess for those that don't know, they're a large OEM. And specifically, the business I worked in was the industrial air compressor division. Graduated college, with a hope to get into a sales role. Just really didn't think much beyond that. Just knew that I thought a sales role was something that would appeal to me. Did that in a few different locations. Was able to progress with the company and get a few different leadership roles. Move around the country. And have some different responsibilities, and that's what really opened my eyes to the parts and service business with them, and that was my first exposure was with that company. I had a few different roles with them, actually specifically focused on aftermarket service. So that really, that was eye-opening for me to see the value of parts and service to a large OEM, but also see the value to your customer. So got a lot of great experience there, a lot of customer-facing experience, but also had a few different corporate roles within the organization. From there, joined a company by the name of Husqvarna, outdoor power equipment, to lead their parts and accessories division. Another great company, large global OEM, completely different space, outdoor power products. Had a brief stint with them. Unfortunately, that was cut short due to reduction in force during COVID and the pandemic. And then had a brief stint with a global OEM in the car wash equipment space prior to joining Franklin almost exactly a year ago. Actually, just had my 1-year anniversary a few weeks ago to lead their aftermarket business unit. So got exposed to aftermarket and service early in my career. Had some roles where I was managing P&Ls where parts and service were a part of that. And then as I progressed and got more leadership roles, unknowingly, just kind of ended up being in aftermarket in some of those roles. So had aftermarket leadership roles with all of those OEMs. So it's been a fun journey. It's been really unique to see the different maturity of different OEMs, where they are on their growth strategy and their plan for their aftermarket business. It's been a very eye-opening and educational career path. But, it's been a lot of fun.
When I think of some of the things you mentioned, you probably spend, I'd say, 10, 15 years or more in and around parts and service in a variety of different companies. But I think the common thread in them is they're all equipment makers and what I would call B2B equipment makers, right? I mean, there's nothing consumer-oriented in there, or is Husqvarna a bit consumer?
No.
So all B2B stuff.
Yeah,
right?
B2B, B2C. Yep.
So when you think about this kind of model that you've been around in terms of the last 15, 20 years of being around B2B stuff, what stands out in your mind in terms of the commonality of those experiences, especially relating to the parts and service business? What's common thread? Because you have Ingersoll Rand in compression, you have Husqvarna in power, you have the car wash equipment companies selling to gas stations and convenience, whatever. And now Franklin Electric, which does a whole bunch of things, including rental fleets, if I remember correctly, right?
Yep.
What are the common thread in all of them?
I think the one thing that people don't think about is a $30 part is just as important to your customer as a $30,000 part. Their equipment can't run with either one of those. So if I own a $500 piece of equipment and I need a $30 part to make it run, that's just as important to me as a as an equipment owner or operator as if I own $1 million piece of equipment and I need a $30,000 part. And you need to create, or you need to treat them the same way. So your supply chain shouldn't matter based on the value of the part. And I've seen OEMs get tripped up on that. And I think that has been a consistent theme that I see across, because really, I think I mentioned it. The aftermarket and the service business is so absolutely critical to your customers. You have to treat a $30 part as if it's a $30,000 part. That's just as big of a win for you as a $30,000 part. In your whole strategy, your whole infrastructure, team, everything needs to be set up to execute the same on a $30 part versus a $30,000 part, and have the same sense of urgency around it. I think that helps people, I guess, maybe look at it from the customer's perspective. And that's always been a theme with everything I've done in my roles is, what is our strategy and how does that impact our customer, and where does it start with the customer? And frankly, everything we do should start with the customer. But you really need to level the playing field in aftermarket, and don't just chase, the big elephant, the $30,000 parts sale, because that $30 part is just as important to another customer. And you need to behave the same way and support them the same way.
Something you said is really important. And one of our guests, Shari, also mentioned the same thing, which is you putting the customer at the center of this whole process, right? Because downtime is downtime. Whether there's a washer or a big solenoid or something goes down, or a big impeller goes on a pump is down. It doesn't matter what happened. And your customer's upset because something has happened and their production is down or whatever it could be. And I think many of us understand that, but I'm going to ask a controversial question. Is this a well appreciated concept, Ryan? Because it is such an important and simple one, but I think people get lost in the math of $30 versus $30,000, don't they?
Absolutely. And it becomes difficult when you have, different, different organizations or different departments within your organization that have different metrics for success. And that's where you can really get tripped up. Because if my metric for success is inventory turns, I don't want to carry this super expensive part that I'm only going to turn once a year. I want to keep those small, high volume parts that are just churning, that are, keeping my inventory fresh and turning over. So yeah, I think you're right, and it really starts from the top down. In organizations that I've seen be successful, it comes from the leaders in the organization. They speak about it often. It's not just a business review meeting. It's not just a special occasion. We're having this meeting. I'm going to say something about it, but it's in their vernacular every day. They talk about it every day. They talk about it, and not just in meetings. When you're interacting with your coworkers and things like that, or you're just talking to a leader in the hallway, you should anticipate that they're going to ask you about your parts and service business, because it should be close to the top of their strategies for what they're working on. And when you can get the importance from the top and bringing it throughout your organization, that helps kind of break down some of those barriers, because now you can get people aligned to that North Star, if you will, that top goal.
One more controversial take on that, right? I mean, maybe I'll just be direct. You grew up, quote unquote, in Ingersoll Rand, which is incredibly operation, not just well run, but had a focus on the customer and service as well, right?
Yes.
So to some degree, this was ingrained in you, right? This is how you operate. This is how you think about a customer. This is how you think about the business. Obviously, you and I have been around this market for a long time. Not everybody thinks that way, right? So the question for you is, as you've gone to these different companies, right, without exactly getting into trouble naming companies, has that been a change process you've had to deal with in terms of getting people sensitized to put in the customer at the heart of everything, right? Because I came from General Electric, you came from Ingersoll. We had very similar, what I would call, mindsets in terms of service and aftermarket, right?
Yes. Yeah.
How much change management did you have to do with every time you moved to a new company after Ingersoll?
That's a great question. It's significant, and you're right. Yeah, I grew up in a company that placed the customer first. So much so that I remember a mentor telling me earlier on in my career that you could only earn a leadership position in this company if you have spent significant time in front of a customer, meaning you've spent either years in a sales territory, you spent years in the field managing an office, or managing service business or whatever. But you've been in the trenches. You've had difficult conversations with your customer. You've had to service them and deal with the day-to-day puts and takes of an industrial service business. And that's seeing that in our organization. The leaders all had that. They came from that. They've stood in front of customers and dealt with the things that the customers are struggling with every day, and that helps kind of bring a sense of urgency to your corporate environment or your corporate culture, if you will, if you're surrounding yourself with customer focused people. The change management is difficult, but with anything, use the data to argue your case. I mean, it starts, like I said, it starts with the customer, but use data to show that. Don't, I've pitched business cases where I've had to say, well, the customer told me this. That's usually not good enough. Bring some data to the table. Or in my current role, we use the term, skin in the game. Does your customer have skin in the game with what you want to do? Which is, I think, a phenomenal question to ask, and the right mentality for our leadership to have. Because if you're going to pitch a business plan, it shouldn't be my idea. I should be doing something that's solving a need for a customer. And I know that because I asked them, I talked to them, I interacted with them, I got their feedback. If it's a new program or a new product or whatever, I've got their buy-in that they're going to be there when we go live, and they've made commitments to us in writing. So I think that's key in change management is to speak. Obviously, first again, starts with your customer, but then speak from a perspective of data and not opinion. And that's, those two things together will tell you exactly what you should be doing in your day-to-day business. It becomes very obvious. And that's a powerful argument to make, and it's hard to argue with. There could be competing resources, and, you may not get the resources you want, but it's rare that you're going to get a flat out no. We're not going to go do that. If the customer tells us they need it, I can build a business case that says there's a return on it. And the data is there to support it. I mean, just in my 12 months here at Franklin, I've already seen that play out significantly. And it's been just a breath of fresh air. It's been fantastic to be a part of, because we are, I see that in the leaders in our organization. They all talk about customers, and it's the conversations always start with customers and what their needs are. And then what are we doing to solve them, and how are they coming along with us to help us solve them? So that we're not creating things in a vacuum and then just going to market with, hey, look what I did. Let's see if it works. So I think start at the customer, use data to make your argument. And that's a pretty powerful statement to make.
We've all grown up extolling the virtues of putting the customer first and kind of doing all these. But I think what you just said is actually interesting, right? You definitely have the philosophical mindset of customer first, but you bring data to the party. So there's less emotion and less argument about my thinking versus your thinking, and it's all fact-based. Now, again, coming back to your roots at Ingersoll Rand, you guys are very much a disciplined operational company, metrics and so on and so forth. Is that kind of some of the thinking you've brought to Franklin? Is that some of the thing, or was already there and you just augmented their approach already with some of the stuff you brought to the party? How is that? Again, I'll call it change management, because by definition, when they bring in somebody new from the outside, there's change management, right?
Right.
How's that?
Right. Franklin actually has done a very, very good job of utilizing Power BI, and that's been a tool that's been a part of, I think, every company I've worked for. I've seen it used in various degrees of success. But Franklin has done a very good job of setting up dashboards and making it very easy to access those metrics and that data. It's something that actually I've been very impressed with in terms of, I've worked elsewhere where, BI data is something that people didn't always trust and would call it, directional, which is, a little disconcerting if you're making business decisions off of directional data. But I feel like when I'm looking at a BI dashboard, I'm looking at accurate data. And I think I wouldn't say that there's been a ton of change management around metrics for in this my current role. I would say that's going to be coming with some of the changes we've made this year. We definitely have to change some of the metrics that we're looking at, but we're still kind of, I would say, pretty in our infant stages in terms of the changes we made. So, but that'll come. That'll come with time, definitely.
Again, if I go back and think about when I first got to meet you and all the experiences you've had since then, we talked about customers, we talked about metrics, we talked about measurement and change. You've seen your share, again, because you're also a good observer. You watch people around you in the sense of companies. When you think of the companies in the market that you and I are in, which is B2B equipment makers and aftermarket, in your mind, what are the attributes or what are the characteristics that set what I would call the champions apart from those who are quote unquote not champions, right? Or champions from theirs? What are your takeaways on that one?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think I'd say a couple things. First, it starts at the top. Is your company is aftermarket or services or parts and service? However you phrase it, it seems like everybody phrases it differently. But is that at the core of your top 3 strategies? It should be mentioned by name at the top of your organization. It should be talked about by your leaders, like I said, constantly. And then, if you've got that in your culture, that means, you've got a receptive leadership team when you come with ideas and growth ideas and things that you want to go spend money on. You've got a receptive audience. But the other thing that comes along with that is you need a dedicated team. And that sounds obvious, I think, and kind of basic, but I've seen it where it's not dedicated and it's a failure. Things as simple as think about, your distribution center for your parts. Having your distribution center for your parts in your factory where you're making finished goods is not a great idea. You run out of parts on your production line. Where are they going to go to grab a part from the aftermarket parts? Well, okay, who picks, packs, and ships aftermarket parts? There's the production guy, and he does it, from 8 to 10 in the morning and 2 to 3 in the afternoon. Or, it creates a lot of complexity there when you don't have dedicated teams. And it's, that's just an example of what's going on the floor of a distribution center. But I mean dedicated. From there, I mean dedicated product management. I mean dedicated engineering, dedicated sales, a dedicated leader, its own P&L. That is in itself is absolutely critical. It needs to stand up as its own business unit and have the infrastructure underneath it to support it and drive it. As you know, there's so much that goes into an aftermarket portfolio that's, behind the scenes, nuts and bolts, or data or things like that if you don't do at the beginning when a part is born into your system, if you don't do those things, you're creating this proliferation of waste down the road. Whether it be, you set up a part today and you don't have a strong, process on how to set up a part, meaning you don't have to set up a part, you absolutely have to have these attributes. I need to know the dimensions, the weights, the color, the packaging requirements, think about everything it takes to sell a part. If you don't have those things entered into your system when that part is created, down the road, 5 years from now you've got a portfolio of 100,000 SKUs. Let's say you want to start selling those SKUs online. How are you going to do it if you don't know how much they weigh? How are you going to package them if you don't have any requirements? And now how are you going to go do that for 100,000 SKUs? So it's I think it's those tactical building blocks for the portfolio that are so critical that people don't think about at all. I mean, I've seen so many companies launch a new product, go through the entire NPD process, and not be ready to service the product when they go live because they haven't thought about it, they hadn't prepared for it. So there's so much detail that goes into creating a clean portfolio, as an example, that should be done on the front end. And when it's done on the front end, it opens up the options that you have commercially to offer more things to your customer or to change the way you interact with your customer or sell to your customer. There's a lot that goes on there that people don't know about or don't think about or don't want to do. Frankly, it's not like it's sexy, glamorous work, but it is critical. It's absolutely critical. So I think having the strategy from the top of the organization is key, and then the standalone P&L business unit that has a team of people that are dedicated to parts and service, or however your organization's going to market. But I'd say those two components, leadership and then the standalone team, that's when you can do something. That's when you can change the way you operate today. You can move quicker. You can execute. I've been in roles where, frankly, I've failed because I was an executive role with no organization that directly reported to me. But I had to kind of figure out, how are we going to grow this parts business? That's hard to do. And when you spend the majority of your time trying to navigate an organization, it's you're not spending very much time helping your customers. So the more you can just be your own team, be nimble, and drive that strategy, I think that's what separates folks apart. I think too many people try to do parts and service without having a dedicated team, and I think that's a recipe for failure.
It's fascinating what you said. Is I remember this discussion way back when I was General Electric. We made an explicit effort and distinction to carve out the service, what do you call services business back then? We had everything: parts, field service, factory repair, all those things, away from the quote unquote product P&L. And in addition to what you said, the strategy coming from the top, one of the incredibly amazing things we did back then was the assignment or transfer of the best of the best talent into building of the services business, right? So it took an incredibly concerted effort from the leadership back then to say, we're going to take our best people and stick them in services because of two things. One is, we've underinvested for too long. We need the best talent out there. But B, if this is going to be a growth engine for us, then I need to get my best leaders in place who can build this business, build the P&L, and grow it fast compared to what it used to be. And I think that the combination of those two things is very powerful. Now,
Yes.
You said something which is, in my mind, the right thing for the modern age. You talked about weight and size and dimensions and so on and so forth. I have to admit, that's not something that most of us thought about, even back when I was a practicing aftermarket guy, right? Because you just put it in a box, you put it in a truck and send it, didn't think twice about it. Now you have to worry about this whole e-commerce thing, right? And people worrying about, not worrying, but people just having automatic ordering and going, is that going to be like a big hurdle for people to get through? Because if you think of a catalog, what people have, manufacturers like Ingersoll Rand or Franklin, you got hundreds of thousands of part numbers there. Right? To be able to make all that information come together is a monumental task.
Right? It absolutely is. And there are degrees. That's so. If you wanted to go sell on Amazon tomorrow, that'd probably be the most difficult. In terms of the amount of data that you're going to have to provide around your parts. Or you could simply just start selling on your own website and just take a few photos and just kind of wing it that way as well. But yeah, it's and that's why I mentioned earlier it's you have to stop it, or you have to control it on the front end, and at some point you have to put that control in place so that nobody can create a part without checking all those boxes first. And I remember a project I was doing years and years ago. We had a consultant helping us, and I asked her, I said, who is really, really good at managing their parts? Who's an OEM that's really good? And his comment was, he named a large manufacturer in the construction equipment industry that we would all know. And I said, well, what makes them so good about managing their portfolio? We were talking specifically about product management for parts. And he said they're maniacal. He said they're absolutely maniacal about who can and cannot create a part. And if you're on the list of people who can create a part, the list of attributes that you have to provide before that part can be created are significant, because they want to know every single thing about that part, because when it goes live, it's going to be live on their catalog, meaning it's orderable to a customer when they hit the button. But part of those attributes, not only, I'll even add to, it's not just packaging requirements, weights, dims, et cetera, labeling, et cetera, but sunsetting. Do you have a strategy for sunsetting parts? Because if you don't, you're going to proliferate your portfolio with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of SKUs. And how does your supply chain know when to stop ordering them? How do you know if those vendors can even supply them? How do you, like, the amount of issues that are created from that are just horrendous and impossible to manage. So if you're very, very tight on the front end, you eliminate all of that. But yeah, I think with the age of e-commerce is forcing people to do that. And you know, we deal digitally with our customers. It's just a, you know, I would say less than ideal customer experience in terms of the data that we give them today, whether that be, you know, pictures or dimensions, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think the push for e-commerce over the past however many years is definitely pushing parts people to be smarter about how they manage their portfolio, which is a good thing. I mean, I think about it from the, you know, when your customer opens the box of parts you ship them, what do they see? They see a bunch of, you know, clear Ziploc bags with handwritten Sharpie part numbers on them, or is there a branded box with your parts in it? You know, what kind of experience is your customer going through? What do you want that to be? But all those, you know, bits and pieces of information are all super, super critical to executing on that customer experience. And you can't do it without them. So
spoken
yeah, it's
like
very,
a
very
sales spoken like a sales and marketing guy versus an operations guy. What's my customer experience? What does she feel when she opens a box and finds a Ziploc bag with handwritten part numbers or branded merchandise with, you know, the right kind of stuff? You know, actually, that's really important. And I think we're going to run out of time in the next few minutes. But you know, what you just said is actually really. I was going to go in a different direction, but I'm going to pick up this thread a little bit. Right, one of my questions for you, because you're a sales and marketing guy at heart.
Yep.
Your thinking is not exactly commonplace.
Right.
I mean, I hate to say this, but my peers, your peers, our ilk are all about, can I get the part in the box and out the factory fast enough on time or not? Versus thinking through the customer back experience and all this whole thing. You know, is that what you're seeing as well? Which is we are still fundamentally an operationally focused persona type versus a customer and delight focused persona type. Does that make sense? My question to you?
It does, yeah. And I've seen it with other companies. So, you know, in the parts space, you're always competing with non-OEM, you know, competitors that are copying your parts. It's pretty embarrassing to walk into a customer's parts room and see the non-OEM competitors' parts on the shelf in a nice, pretty labeled box with their logo and everything on it. In this, you know, everything's organized and neat. It's got a great label on a barcode, their company logo, et cetera, et cetera. And then yours, the OEM, is sitting right next to it with no container, and just literally somebody had just written the part number on it with a Sharpie. And then you're asking that customer to pay 20 to 40% more for your part versus the non-OEM. And in his mind, well, I can put that part in, it works. These people clearly know what they're doing. They're, you know, their packaging looks a lot more professional than yours does as the OEM. It's a problem, and it's, you know, packaging. That's not going to be your number one growth lever. Excuse me, but it is important. The customer experience is very important, and I think it you know, it can erode at your brand a little bit if you're lacking in that area.
You know, it sounds trivial, but I think in the modern day and age, when the people who are replacing people like me, the professionals replacing people of my generation, they're the ones who used to press button, get stuff on the doorstep, and nice packaging, nice experience. You know, my instincts is, as the generational change turnover takes place in these companies, both the manufacturers and their customers, you know, there's got to be this dramatically up-leveled way of thinking about the customer experience. If not, there's going to be a bunch of unhappy people, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. how it's all about how do you get your part to your customer when they need it, the right quantity, the right part at the right time. And that's, I used to always say, price and availability were the most important things. I've had customers tell me availability is the only thing that matters. In fact, I've had customers say availability will trump quality. I know, we had customers buying non-OEM products from a competitor and said, I know they use a lesser material than you guys do. I know it's not going to last as long as yours does, but they have it and I need it and you don't.
Interesting.
But so yeah, the ease of that transaction, I think those are all connected. The perception of doing business with an OEM, and then the ease of doing business, I think, are very, very critical.
I'm going to go ask maybe 1.5 questions more related to what you were just talking about a little while ago, not the last conversation about experience.
Sure.
You talked about the unreasonably complex environments in the context of the catalogs, the number of parts, the different kinds of things you have. You've been, I guess, in the last few years, you've been like 3 or 4 different companies now. Is complexity ever going to go away in an OEM's aftermarket? Because it feels like the more I've dug into it, it feels like an OEM's aftermarket is an incredibly complex being.
Yeah,
is that ever going to go away, or is that just a fact of life?
You definitely see some standardization. I don't know if that's the right word, but maybe, I definitely see a trend of OEMs who are maybe if they've been around a long time, they maybe early on in their life, they tried to be everything to everybody with their equipment. And I think more and more the past few years, OEMs are seeing that it's not very profitable when you're trying to make every single widget and option and variation for every single customer. Maybe it's good to do for our top customers, and maybe we even limit it for them. But for these people that buy from us once a year, or once every other year, or whatever, why are we, introducing all this complexity into our business? Because it proliferates everything. So I think, I don't know the complexity is going to go away specifically, but because I think you're always going to have, whether you call it ETA, engineered to order, or, the heavily optioned and engineered product. I think that's always going to be there. There's always going to be a need for that. But I think that I've seen OEMs start to standardize on design to make a maybe, I don't know, a more standard core with the ability to build options that are more interchangeable. So I see definitely some of that, because people recognize that having that many SKUs that are so specific to so specific pieces of equipment is extremely difficult to manage. And frankly, you just end up not managing it, which means, it's going to end up for a really, really bad conversation with your customer.
Or you wind up where my pet peeve has been for the last many years, but the thing that worries me most is that all you rely on people who've been around the company or the industry for decades, who know everything in their head. And then you're relying on what I would call tribal knowledge to solve these problems of complexity.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, that's to me is a scary part,
That is it's very scary. All that tribal knowledge exists in people's heads and is not documented anywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is very scary. But the complexity, I think it depends on your NPD cycle. Having worked in industrial equipment and then a little bit in consumer goods and at Husqvarna, I mean those NPD cycles are so different. I think that is probably the biggest impact to that complexity, what that looks like.
Well, Ryan, we've had a fascinating discussion about what it takes to succeed in the aftermarket business, what champions do, and all the different learnings you've had all along the way. Now, I always like to end my interviews, my discussions with my guests with a simple question that I love. I'm a big podcast guy, and I love this podcast by Guy Raz, and how I built this. And he always asks a question to his guests: how much of your success that you've had, Ryan, so far, do you ascribe to luck? And how much of it is because Ryan's just this amazingly talented human being who just can power through everything?
Definitely not the latter.
Yeah.
Um, there's definitely some luck. There's a lot of luck involved. And when I look back on my career, I think I've been able to be successful a lot of it because of the relationships I've had, and I think that comes with there's some luck involved with that. Who do you come across in your career? Who do you kind of latch onto, or who do you seek out to go meant to learn from, to be a mentor to you? Things like that. That's been, I would say, maybe the most critical part of my career is having the people that came before me, making those connections and having those relationships. That's been probably the most important thing. I think, I'm a marketing. I got a marketing degree from Indiana. I'm not a PhD. I'm not. I didn't graduate top of my class. I don't know how much of it was me, or just kind of the network that I've built and the people that I know and have helped me along the way.
It's actually interesting to hear that, because I think all of us have come from different walks of life into winding up in the places we wind up at. But I think there's an element of luck, but there's also an element of the fact that you took advantage of that opportunity that you were given to kind of wind up in this place. So it's a mix of both, like you said.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Well, I got to tell you, Ryan, it's been a great conversation today, but it's really a affirmation of what I've known and what I've seen in you for the last many years, in terms of thoughtfulness and the way you thought, build the career, and the way you think about it. And I think what you said is correct, right? You have grown up where you have a management team, a leadership team that believed in aftermarket and services. You start there. You wind up with people who kind of dedicate some resources and make sure it works, not like a part-time job, here and there. Kind of dedicate some things. You put the customer at the heart of it, get the full experience understood, and kind of build it up from there. And that really starts setting apart the champions from the rest. And I think your background and experiences have been just a fabulous way to bring it together. So really good insights and ideas for our listeners today. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks for having me, Vivek. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, I'm sure you can find out more about Ryan and everything he's done. You can find him on LinkedIn at Ryan Cook at Franklin Electric, or you can always reach out to him via me at Entitled, and I can route your inquiry to him. But thank you, Ryan, so much for joining us as a guest today, and look forward to watching your career progression with great anticipation and excitement. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vivek.
As we complete another enlightening episode, I extend my sincere gratitude to our esteemed guests and you, our valued listeners. If today's conversation resonated with you, please subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Play, or simply visit our website at www.entitled.com for more enriching content. Remember, the pursuit of aftermarket excellence is an ongoing journey, and I look forward to continuing with you. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and continue championing aftermarket success.